Hello and welcome to The Nation This Week. I'm Gerard Ratnam. On this week's show, we've got lots happening for you. As usual, we have a stellar panel lined up for you to talk about issues that made the news or news pieces that made the week this year in Malaysia and also outside Malaysia. Well, before I bring in my panel, I'd just like to walk you through what's happening in the news. So as of this week, we know there's 52,000 online fraud cases so far, with more than 1.61 billion ringgit in losses reported. So there's quite a few things happening. The police, they're having, or Malaysia's finest, they're having some programs that are ongoing. I was nearly scammed. I'm going to get to that. Also, the big news this week, UMNO General Assembly just coming in from the Johor election. We'll be talking a little bit about that. The other big news, EPF withdrawals, another 10,000 allowed. A lot of mixed feelings around that, but we'll find out from the panel. And one of my bigger news pieces that I came across this week was this athlete, Shireen Vellaboy. And of course, we'd like to thank the big Frankie D or Frankie de Cruz for writing about it and bringing this to light with regards to us celebrating our athletes. But before that, let me introduce to you our panel. Dr. Oisan is here, AZMI Hassan, and Datuk Dr. A.T. KUMARARAJAH, all usual suspects on the show. Guys, thank you very much for doing this. Well, just so we're clear, today's show is dedicated to Shireen Vellaboy, who did really well. Guys, how do you think, what do you want to say to her? What's your message to Shireen? We'll start with A.T.
I think we must congratulate her, and this is all these unsung heroes, Gerard, because I think many of these unsung heroes are quite not recognized. I don't think by design, maybe by default. I hope it's by default. And I think when she's back, or I think both the state government or even the federal government should support her in that endeavor that she's gone in. She's got a good pedigree. I think she's got a long way to go, and she's probably one of our shining stars in terms of this athletics that we have. For us. So congratulations to her.
Yeah, congratulations to her. And also, let's not forget that she comes from a family of decorated athletes. Her mother and father both represented the country, Samson and Josephine Mary. Oh.
Well, I think she's, of course, a very good role model for a lot of young people in this country and beyond. Namely, you work hard, you persevere, and finally you achieve the kind of success that you deserve. I think nowadays, as we are sort of going through these difficult stretches in our economy, it's a very encouraging story for a lot of us.
Yeah, Gerard, it's a national record. Indeed, I think we should congratulate her, Shireen, and she's lucky because at the US University, they have a very good system of athleticism where athletic can procure coach and also their assets there. So I think Shireen, she's very lucky, and as Dr. A.T., Dr. Isan said, I think we should congratulate her and be proud of her, Gerard.
Right. And with that, Shireen, if you are watching this show is dedicated by all of us here at Bernama and also the panel. And congratulations once again. So now, I guess the big question is, last week, it was a big week. We had very few of you on the air. We couldn't have all of you guys on the air. So Johor elections coming out of that, AT, I'm sure you have a lot to say about this. I think AZMI wants to talk about the youth and how the youth is taking the country by storm. I certainly didn't feel that vibe. I don't know. Let's start with AT again on this one.
Now, if you're looking at what happened in Johor elections, again, I really don't feel that the youth made a huge difference. Maybe in some seats, Muda did win its inaugural elections in terms of one seat. But I think primarily it was an election which we called for. I think the results were very much known. I think, but they did much better than actually many people had expected. Low turnout, but I think the deputy president of UMNO did make it out and says, look, our voters turned up, your voters didn't turn up, so we won the elections. So I think that was a very fair game. It's probably indicative of where our nation is heading, at least in the midterm. Hoping for a general election very, very soon.
But I guess we'll get, AZMI, you're going to be the last to weigh in on this. Let's get Ahsan first. Ahsan has been very skeptical about this from the get-go. From a year ago when we spoke to him about it. Ahsan.
Well, number one, the so-called 18 to 20 years old voters, they constituted about 6 or 7% of the total number of voters. And even though I think people are still doing a lot of analysis and calculations, I think it's quite safe to say the youth or the young voters, their turnout is not spectacular as well as compared to the other cohorts of voters. Granted, it's a very positive development that Muda won one seat, and hopefully with its Secretary General winning that seat, it could articulate some of the policies, positions of the party, because the party would have to, in a humble opinion, go beyond just the youthfulness type of appeal. It has to be more, substantive in its policy appeal. Yeah.
Right. So I guess it's up to AZMI now, because he said you said I want to talk about this. You see it differently, AZMI. So what do you actually see with regards to how this pans out? Because all of us have different viewpoints with regards to this. So I guess you're seeing it very differently.
Gerard, one thing for sure is that where I vote Tun Perling, all three candidates are not under 40. They are above 40. And I like to say that the candidate that I vote did not win. Okay, that's one thing for sure. Let's put that aside. Ching Tong won, the DAP strategist in Tun Perling. But again, why I said youth play a critical role, I'm just a little bit digress from Dr. Ihsan just now, because out of, there are 60 plus candidates that are under 40 years old. And 16 of them, nearly 25%, 20% have been voted in. So I think that's very good statistics. 60 out of 16 got voted in. I think for the candidates under 40 years old, I think that's a very good signal for what the future is, Gerard.
Well, if you're just joining us on the show, we are doing our weekly roundup. On the panel is Dr. Ihsan, no stranger to TV and radio, political analyst, AZMI Hassan, Geo-strategist. Congratulations on the Nusantara Academy. Never got to do that. And Dr. A.T. Kumararajah, Treasurer General of NCCIM. Let's move on to the other thing that's bugging all Malaysians. 10,000 ringgit EPF withdrawals. I've been getting withdrawal symptoms just hearing people talk about this. What are your thoughts on this?
Gerard, you're probably not the only one, right? So EPF themselves actually came up with a statement. It's quite shocking after the Prime Minister's announcement and the absence of the Finance Minister is very telling in the next day at the Parliament. But EPF themselves came up and reiterated and says, look, we're very worried that this is not the way, and we hope that this is the last withdrawal that the government approves, because their estimate is if all the 6.3 million remaining people with $10,000 or more start making withdrawal, that itself will put a run of $63 billion on them. Mind you that in the last 2 years, they have already given out $101 billion. So EPF is really, that announcement is actually the aftermath of what really happened in Johor as far as I'm concerned. I think it was very much time to balance the UMNO General Assembly that is happening, and also a very populist move, but a very mismatched action, because you cannot use long-term savings for short-term remedies, and that's really a complete mismatch. It was wrong earlier. It's certainly wrong now, because very few people have actually left anything left. The 50% of them don't even have anything left.
But sorry, AT, I need to interject here. But saying if I am the person who's in a predicament now and I don't have funds, I know I have a little bit in there, what can stop me from taking it out? No, I really I need it now.
True. Yeah. But then if you look at the empirical evidence that's there, every retirement fund world over, only by this forced savings that the EPF more or less imposes on us, only then you have some semblance of savings for the future. Because in no country they have actually had any other formula that works. So a forced saving concept is the only thing that works. You should not touch it. But unfortunately, we allowed it. I suppose it is a populist move, maybe makes a few people happy, but overall, it's bad news. Otherwise, Gerard, you probably would have had 6.7% to your EPF account. Now you only have 6.1% this time around. If that $100 billion had remained within EPF.
Geez, have you been spying on me? Ahsan, what do you think of this?
Well, I took out some of those Amanah Saham National type of savings at some point in my life when I was really down, when I was, I wouldn't say out of a job, but really down. And well, afterwards I replenish it. That's my very rudimentary financial planning. But I think this particular move at this particular juncture, right before the UMNO General Assembly, it's also partly on the part of the Prime Minister to placate some of his party colleagues. I think they are pushing him towards politically towards early election and so on. So he has to, in a sense, throw some, well, bonds to them so that hopefully their pressure on him would not be so harsh. Yeah.
As AT rightly pointed out just now, a couple of populist moves happening as we move forward, because everyone's now looking towards when the next election is coming. Azmi?
Yeah, I think I like what Dr. Ihsan said. He's very diplomatic. Dr. AT, he's very forthright.
The analysts are sticking together, AT.
Yeah, but again, as the Prime Minister said, he really hopes that those who really need it, withdraw it. Those who don't really need, just hang on it. So I think there are pros and cons to it. But I think, as Gerard said, there are people who need it now. So I think that's why. Of course, because of the General Assembly, the UMNO General Assembly, it plays also into this scheme of things, Gerard.
Right. Because you guys, some of you guys are economically savvy, I'm just going to put it out there. So they say that the success of a country lies on the fact that there's a flourishing middle class. Now, for us, from where we are here to get to where we want, and we're having this minimum wage debate going on, how do we get there? No, we have a problem with this whole minimum wage situation. And AT, you want to talk about this? I think Azmi want to talk about this too. So let's talk about the minimum wage now. Where do you guys think we stand? And do we need to do better? I know we need to do better, but how can we move forward without this much debate?
Shiv, again, right? So again, minimum wage discussion itself is already in stone ages, because the concept of minimum wage, even within our country, only formalized in 2003 at 900 ringgit, and then over the couple of years, I think 4 moves. The last move in 2020, where we went from 1100 to 1200. Every 2 years, we have already agreed in the National Wage Consultative Council that every 2 years we will move the minimum wage. So it was due in 2020. What the minister said, we will do it end of the year. In Parliament this week, he said we will do it in a more stratified manner. Certain sectors might have been given some sort of a leeway, some moratorium for them to probably implement it in the next year. To me, the logic of minimum wage doesn't really exist, because if you use the formula within the ministry itself, which looks at inflation, which looks at the current economic situation, and also looks at the businesses' standpoint, you already should have a minimum wage of 1,832. Whichever, even if you use the productivity-linked wage system, we should already be just sub 2,000. So minimum wage is primarily very much based on an old system, especially in a country where we want to become high-income nation. We are 20% off the mark. We are still about 20%, 30% off the mark, even if you look at the average household income at 7,000 plus. So to me, minimum wage should have been done. There is no compromise. Maybe for the businesses, you could do it in a stratified manner in 2 phases, but it is something that you must implement, because nearly 27% of our workforce of 15 million, which is about 4.2 million people, will actually benefit from this minimum wage. And there are many arguments about high inflation and what do you call number of people who lose jobs will be much higher. No evidence to show that all the countries which have moved wages up, none of this happens.
Okay, so the general everyday Joe in Malaysia thinks, okay, 1,800, let's say it is 1,800. So the way they would play this math out in their head is, okay, so saying if I get 1,800 and I've got a family of 3, how do I survive?
That's living wages, right? Sorry.
Yeah.
So Bank Negara has already come up with this concept of living wages. Says if you are a bachelor in Klang Valley, you should already be having a minimum of 2,007 to have a semblance of life. If you are a couple for 4,500, and if you had two children, 67.
Guys, jump in when you want to. Yeah. Okay.
So nowhere close. So you're nowhere close.
That 80. I know. I agree with you that whatever number you put in, 1,005 or 1,008, that's why they call it minimum wage. There must be some objection, especially from the business owners. That's the reason why we are stuck right now. No agreement on it. But again, if you look at a political angle, we need a strong political will. That needs a very strong government. But as it is right now, that 80, I think, is a no-go. I think it will be stuck until we get a very strong government. If not, we are be negotiating until towards the end.
Okay, so as we're negotiating collectively as stakeholders in this country, okay, so as a country, as a product, a country, I would say as a product, and you put something out there in the world, you need to have something to sell, to invite people here, to make this place, we need to have these fundamentals in check before we even get into conversations like, can we afford to pay people this much? Ihsan, the economics of policies with regards to how people look at us and, us looking out.
Well, I think minimum wage is but one segment in, shall we say, a larger socio-economic narrative. I could think of how it should be linked to at least two other issues. One is, of course, trying to, for example, wean ourselves away from the dependence on foreign workers, right? I mean, it is quite amazing to me. On the one hand, we are talking about people struggling, barely receiving a minimum wage. Should it be slightly lower, slightly higher, and so on? And on the other hand, we have so many foreign workers coming to our country to work. So there has to be some sort of linkage between these two issues to create more jobs for our population and to discourage the usage of foreign workers. And then the other issue is, of course, education. You want people to earn higher income, you need to have education reform, for example, to make sure that they are higher skilled, they are very much in demand in whatever sectors where people would need human resources. So if you combine at least these three issues together, I think you will hopefully have a more comprehensive solution. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, we're always looking for a comprehensive solution, I guess. And I think this conversation is going to be ongoing for as long as we don't know what business is like. Only when we open for business on April 1st, and we're expecting for lock, stock, and barrel the world to come to us, is that going to happen? Are we what do you call it? Are we prepped to be reopened for business? Because this is the next question a lot of people are asking. We don't want to reopen for business and then say we've got too many sick people. So, with these conversations ongoing, now as a medical doctor, how do you weigh in on this? Balancing our health and for us moving forward by reopening the country for business once again. 80.
Gerard, again, right? So the life versus livelihood argument that's probably existed exactly 2 years ago, right? So we went to the first MCO 18th of March 2020. That life versus livelihood argument probably doesn't hold water anymore. That needs to be coexisting. We put the caveats in place, but I think the reopening of the economy has to happen, and it's already happened. Really, we are back at pre-pandemic level in most sectors. Some sectors are probably will be there after the 1st of April, especially the tourism-related businesses, which gives about 14% of our GDP. So I personally think, and I think that's where the country is heading to, we probably have to coexist and look at the COVID with all the vaccination cover and boosters in place. We probably have to look at COVID as a common flu and move on with our lives, because we cannot, it's already 2 weeks rolled into 2 years. We cannot afford to have anything more. Because that window of opportunity will be lost if we, economically speaking, and even our social standing as far as the nation is concerned.
Right. Moving on to you, Ihsan, you wanted to talk about the US Fed rate hike, the global repercussions with that. And I would like at this juncture to say you have to dumb it down for a few of us. Maybe AT and AZMI will understand it, but for the rest of us who are not economically savvy, we need this language to be a little easier for us to try to get a better worldview of what's happening, because we don't see it, and something is coming. We don't know what's coming. It's going to be hitting the region too, and this is because of supply chains and whatever that's happening out there with the Ukraine-Russian conflict. Now, let's talk about this.
Well, the Federal Reserve, or the Fed, is the United States central bank, right? So whenever the U.S. economy is not doing very well, like it was over the last few years due to the pandemic and so on, so the Federal Reserve, they would lower the interest rate, which makes borrowing money to be less costly, easier, and so on. So when people and businesses borrow more money, well, they can do business and thereby stimulating business. But of course, recently, I think just a few days ago, the Federal Reserve, instead of continue to lower its interest rate, it was previously zero. That means it costs nothing almost to borrow money from bank. Now it raised the interest rate a little bit, so that it costs a bit of interest to borrow money, and that is because the U.S. Inflation rate has become very high. Why do we have inflation? Well, because money is too easy circulating in the market. That's why prices will go up, right? That's why we have inflation. Right. So when you raise the interest rate, in theory, then the money would be taken out of the market, and thereby the prices of goods and services would go down. Now, so the Fed is, of course, purely looking at the U.S. economy. Inflation rate is about 8%, too high. Therefore, we raise the interest rate a bit so that people would not go and borrow money, so that in the open market, there will be not so much money, and thereby prices would fall down, in theory. But of course, US dollars is worldwide, right? I mean, when you do trading with the US, when you supply various goods and services to US, they are paid in US dollars. And when Americans and other foreign investors come to invest, they also invest in US dollars typically. Now, that means for the past few years, there have been a lot of so-called hot money or hot US dollars in our country, because it was very cheap to have US dollars then. But now that the US interest rate it's going up a bit, this hot money in our country would have a tendency to go back to US to take advantage of the higher interest rate there. And thereby, I think in the months to come, you would see, for example, this sort of flowing out of capital, of investments from Malaysia would go up a little bit. And that, of course, is not good news for us. As we
AT, what will the guy on the street see when something like this happens?
Well, you would see, for example, some of these stock markets perhaps would not be having a lot of speculatively high performance. You would see, for example, that kind of inflation, which is inflicting the US, may also be inflicting us. Already we are seeing prices, well, for me, I buy eggs. Eggs prices are going up, for example.
True.
Say from the US dollar to eggs, always comes back to the essentials. AT, anything to add to that? And we're wrapping up as we go around the room.
Yeah, Gerard. Go ahead, Datuk. Go ahead.
No, Prof, carry on.
Okay, thank you. When I like it when Dr. Ihsan said "in theory," because it may work and it may not work. Again, Turkey President Erdogan, in order to cool down the inflation, he did not raise the interest rate. He lowered the interest rate. So he has a different kind of theory compared to the Federal Reserve Chairman. But again, before we wind up, Gerard and Dr. AT, about Shireen, because she's lucky at that United States University, because they have a very good system of scholarship for athletics. And I used to teach a few of these athletics under scholarships in the US when I was a teaching assistant there. And I'm not sure whether maybe Dr. AT and Gerard know Michael Finley. He's a professional basketball player. He used to play for Celtic. He used to play for a few of a professional team. I used to teach him. But to teach this athletics, under athletic scholarship, you need a tender, loving care. You have to work very extra hard. That's
So what you're saying is treat our talent with extra care. That's what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. Correct.
Your closing remarks, your thoughts for the week, your tip.
So that's the thing, right? I mean, when you spoke about the interest rate hike, I mean, usually those days, Gerard, if you remember, like 20 years ago, we used to have like a 13%, 14% interest rate environment in our country. As it is, we have already been having a very low interest rate segment regimen for the last 4 to 5 years. And those days when the Fed catches cold and Malaysia will get pneumonia. So I basically think somewhere in the next, at least next years, we probably headed for an interest rate hike ourselves, because we probably also take cue from what the Fed is doing, especially the movement of markets. But it is one of those instruments to hold on to inflation. It doesn't really work as well as it used to, simply because the flow of money has really moved from a very conventional manner to a very digital manner. And that's where the federal instruments are not as effective or efficacious as they used to be at one point in time.
Right. And on that note, gentlemen, it was a pleasure having you on the show. We'll be meeting up once again. I'm sure we'll be having more discussions. And of course, next week is also going to be a week where we find out a little bit more about how this whole 10,000 ringgit thing is going. We'll be having more information from EPF, and I'll definitely feed some of that to you guys. In the meantime, it'll be exciting to also know what comes out of what do you call that? PAO, which is currently ongoing, the UMNO General Assembly. It's going to be very telling of what's to come in the near future. With that, gentlemen, thank you very much for making the week right here on Bernama. And we'll check in with these guys once again next week. I didn't get to say goodbye to them, but thank you very much, Dato ATK, San, and also AZMI Hassan, who joined us this week on The Nation to help us walk through the news of the week. Thank you very much. Have a great weekend. I'm Gerard Ratnam signing off. Bye-bye.